Snow Treasure, Chapter 17. A new disease found its way into Ryswick. It attacked only the smallest children, the ones who had not yet started to school. They were covered with red spots from head to foot, but the disease differed from the better-known rashes like diphtheria and scarlet fever. The patient had no high temperature. His appetite could be just as good as before the rash. Indeed, Dr. Aker did not insist that the children stop eating. He only said they must stay indoors while covered with the red spots. "What is this new disease?" the people asked each other. Dr. Aker told them a name of many syllables. They could never remember it, so they called it the plague. German measles was Peter's name for it, and with reason. He had been in Dr. Aker's study when he packed his bag before going to visit Bunny, the first of his patients. Peter had seen him put in a bottle of red disinfectant that he used for cuts and bruises. Cotton on the end of a toothpick made a good paintbrush. Bunny Lundstrom had as thick a coat of spots as the leopard of his Noah's Ark. Bunny was told he was quarantined. He had no idea what it meant until his mother explained that Peter and Lavisa would go live at Helga Thompson's house while Bunny had those spots. So quarantined meant that Peter and Lavisa had to go away from home, he decided. The 3-year-old Dahl twins were sick too, and Ole's 2-year-old son, Little Ole. But as none of these had big brothers or sisters, Peter and Lavisa had the distinction of being the only ones turned out from their homes while the disease raged. School? Well, school was out of the question during an epidemic. Dr. Aker went to the commandant to explain why his order could not be carried out. Some of the children, he told, were dangerously ill. It might be fatal for the whole town, for the Germans themselves, if the disease was not checked at once. To open the school would be a sure way to spread it. On his return from the beach, Dr. Aker found Mrs. Lundstrom and Peter waiting in his office for news of his interview with the commandant, and of how the doctor found himself trapped by making his plague so unusual. "How long will this disease last?" the commandant asked me. But I could not tell. "It's a new thing with us," I said, "a disease I've never treated before. It could run 9 days like measles, or 30 days like scarlet fever. But we're taking every precaution. We're isolating and disinfecting." When I said it could spread to the troops on the beach, I thought he looked white. He sent for the German army doctor, a civil enough fellow named Metzger. This Metzger began asking me a long list of questions. Were the tongues coated? Was there undue perspiration? Was there high fever? He seemed surprised with my answers and none well too satisfied. Then he nearly had me when he proposed something I hadn't thought about at all. "I'll take a look at one of your cases, doctor. I'll go back with you when you go," he said to me. Well, he had me there, Dr. Aker went on. It was the last thing I expected. It hadn't occurred to me that an army doctor would be called in for civilian illness, and if so, that he would insist on seeing for himself. One look by him and the epidemic would be over. Those spots might deceive an ordinary person, but they'd never fool a doctor. "Yes, and that would arouse suspicion," Mrs. Lundstrom said. "Maybe they don't suspect us of anything yet, but if they learn we have a reason for keeping the school closed, they'll begin to ask what it is and possibly find out." Peter was open-eyed as the doctor went on with his story. "Well, I had to think fast," he said. "I couldn't behave as if I didn't want him, for that would surely make them inquire why he couldn't see one of the patients. So I said, 'There's nothing I would like better, doctor. I'm distressed at how quickly this sickness spreads. I'd appreciate another opinion, for it seems to travel like wildfire. I'm not sure but what it could spread to your whole camp here.' I thought the commandant drew away from me when I started to tell of the disease. He acted as if I could give it to him just by being there. But now I saw him sort of jump. But Dr. Metzger didn't seem afraid. 'If it's as fast a thing as that, I would indeed like to see one of your cases,' he said. The commandant, however, had a different idea. My words about how it might travel to the whole camp had struck home. He made a sign to the doctor. They went into a little room nearby. I could only hear a buzz of talk, and now and again some words I could understand. Dr. Metzger was trying to win his permission to visit Ryswick to see the new rash for himself, but the other was firm. "Our men were up there yesterday," I overheard the commandant say. You'll have all you can do to see that they don't come down with this disease." He said some other things I didn't hear, but I caught some words to the effect that they were living in a heathenish, outlandish place where a blizzard could blow up out of a calm, and that the diseases were probably as freakish and unexpected as the weather. The best course for them to follow was to have as little as possible to do with the people. When they came back to me, the doctor spoke. "It will not be necessary for me to see any of your patients," he said. "Continue with the treatment you've begun and keep a careful quarantine." Then he gave me a long list of orders about sanitation and burning waste and so on. When he finished, the commandant said, "Remember, if this disease spreads to our army, you'll be held accountable." I could give him my word that none of his soldiers would take the disease. Mrs. Lundstrom and Peter had to laugh. Nothing but the red disinfectant and the cotton-tipped toothpicks could spread Bunny's strange disease. He waved his hand at me to tell me I was dismissed, Dr. Aker went on. "I've taken the liberty of closing the school," I told him. "I've also ordered all the healthy children to stay outdoors whenever possible. There's nothing like fresh air to check an epidemic," I said. So the children's task could go on in spite of all that had happened to prevent it. Bunny recovered, and Lavisa and Peter were allowed to go back to their home. So it was a short-lived disease, the townfolk decided, like 3-day measles. But there were enough new cases to keep the school closed. So the gold kept spilling down the mountain, thousands and thousands of kroners of bullion every day. 2 teams would go out one morning and 2 teams the following day. On every sled was more gold than any of the children had ever seen before. One day, Helga's team got the start on Peter's. When he reached the snake, her team was already there. She seemed buried in her own thoughts. When Peter approached, she hardly answered his wave of greeting. When he began unloading his sled, she came over beside him and dropped on her knees in the snow. "Peter," she whispered, "I'm frightened. I heard something." "Heard something? What?" "Listen," she warned, still in whispers. "There it is again. It's even louder than over by my snowman." "I don't hear anything." "Look! Something moved in the bushes." She pointed to the far side of the fjord. They ran in the direction she pointed. They pushed through the snow-hung brush, but were stopped by the black water at their feet. They were unable to cross the angry rushing stream to the far side where the snow made a thick screen over the heavier shrubbery. "If we could only get over, we could see the prints in the snow." "Are we being watched?" Peter asked. "I don't know. For the last week, I felt eyes on me every time I've turned around."